Hello everyone and welcome back to Backlot Banter. My name is Tucker Hazel, and today I am joined by absolutely the whitest boy that I have ever known, Tanner Dykstra, and we're here to talk about Snow White, the latest from Disney's live-action remake renaissance. We're living through it, Tanner.
Wow,
It's
Zowie.
here. And we're going to tell you our thoughts on this film. And of course, if you have seen it and want to talk to us about it, you can leave your thoughts in the comment section down below, or you can do it on our Discord server where you can talk directly to us about this film. Tanner, it's here after what feels like eons of this movie, like of being on the precipice of releasing.
Oh, just a twinkle in our eye.
We don't have to worry about it anymore.
Thank God.
I'm sitting here, I'm comfy. I'm like, I have seen the new Snow White remake, but how do you feel about this movie?
Tucker, it's no secret that I am not a fan of these Disney live-action remakes. So take it with, take it in heart when I say it's probably the best one they've put out in years, honestly. Sure. I think that is due in no small part to Rachel Zegler's performance. I think she is quite good, the saving grace of the film, and comes out relatively unscathed from the other issues abounding in the film. Yeah. The same cannot be said of her co-star Gal Gadot, who gives one of the worst blockbuster performances I've had the displeasure of seeing. Yeah. The CGI work is fine. I think it looks, fairly stock standard. There are times when it actually looks quite low budget. It looks like something you might find on the Disney Channel in a Descendants film, for example. Sure. There are other times where it looks, pretty dull.
Better Disney Plus, please.
Oh yeah, my mistake. Yeah. No, they took that one Descendants movie off Disney Plus or whatever.
That's a good point. They didn't put it back?
Who's to say? Who cares?
Where'd it go?
Tucker, who cares? I'm not 12 years old.
But you saw Snow White in theaters.
I did see Snow White because it is, in a way, a movie event of this year. Quite a lackluster one, in mine eyes.
Yeah. I feel largely similar. I mean, a lot of the criticisms and praises this movie is getting, I think, are incredibly fair and incredibly agreed upon across the board.
Yeah.
So I don't really know how much analysis of this movie I'm going to really be able to bring to the table. It's like, oh man, that's revolutionary.
But
because I think it's okay.
Yeah.
But I was given a golden opportunity when I arrived home from watching Snow White 2025, and I'm like, you know what? I've never seen the original. I know I might have when I was a tot, but not enough to realize. I realized as the story was happening. I don't even know what that first movie is really about.
Sure.
And so I watched it last night, and the answer is buttfuck nothing. That 1938, I believe, original animated. Is even
it doesn't matter.
But 1930s animated film is really just a little over an hour of these dwarves doing basically nothing and screwing around and being stinky proto minions. And so I now have a growing and mounting respect for the Snow White 2025 movie that completely reinvents the film in, I think, many, many positive ways, and is a much stronger experience than the original animated film, which is not something you're going to hear a lot of people saying. But I very, very, very strongly dislike the original Snow White, having seen it last night, and now in retrospect, even though I watched it after the remake, I'm like, they did their damnedest with this remake. And it makes me appreciate a lot of the, especially story decisions and writing decisions and characterization decisions that they did in Snow White, which isn't to say that this new remake version is a particularly strong movie, or that the characterization or the story points are particularly strong. They are fine. Sometimes they are bad, sometimes they are okay. But when you are basing it off a movie where nothing happens and no characters matter, it is a miracle to have characters that have relationships, and there's stakes and themes and plot progression, which the original movie does not have.
Okay, Tucker, now you sent many messages to this effect,
Yes.
Over the last 8 hours or so.
Yes.
And can I just tell you to my ears what it kind of sounds like? And,
Sure.
This doesn't have to be the review. And I'm no great defender of Snow White 1937.
Yeah.
You'd have to look it up, 1937.
Okay. That's pretty close.
But what it sounds like
I watched
to me
it in 38, so.
is like watching. I tried to come up with a good comparison. I think I found one.
Yeah.
It's like watching Bullet Train and then watching The Great Train Robbery and being like, what the fuck? One of these has characters and themes and plot lines
Sure.
and everything.
Yeah, sure.
Because, like...
It's fair enough.
Snow White
Literally like 100 years later.
Snow White and the Seven Dwarves was the first ever cell animated feature.
Yeah.
And yes, well, obviously it was a huge time because it was that. And I think what you're sort of poking at is what started the whole cultural backlash to this version of Snow White in the first place is Rachel Zegler in an interview being like, hey, listen, that movie came out like 100 years ago. It doesn't have, it doesn't have exactly... a lot of material for us to expound upon and work on. We have to go back to the writing, the drawing board a little bit. And everyone's like, bro, why would you say such a thing? And I don't believe those people who are like massive fans of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs from 1937. I don't buy it. They're just, taking this excuse to fucking get mad that they have a person of Colombian descent playing a character called Snow White. That's the only thing they're mad at. Anywho, where was I going with this, Tucker? What I was going to say is that if you're making a film adaptation of Snow White, which they have done, let's not forget, about 10 years ago, they came out with a little film called Snow White and the Huntsman. Which is
when Gadot was like, "Go, my huntsman," I'm like, that movie.
That's existed. The Huntsman. I had the exact same reaction.
I never saw it, but
you have to do that kind of stuff, and this film is perhaps more of a response to like the cultural conception of Snow White. It is Disney not so much remaking the film from 1937 as it is adapting it and also somewhat responding to it as they have done with things like Beauty and the Beast from a few years ago. They responded to and adjusted the story to fit some criticisms surrounding Belle's character and so on and so forth. To varying effects, I might add, but that's kind of my thesis on like this being an adaptation versus a remake of the Snow White story, which is itself just like a fairy tale from nearly 100 years ago that is based on
1812, I believe.
Sorry, the movie is effectively a retelling of a fairy tale from even longer ago.
And I think all of that is to be said. I think that's an excellent point. But my relationship to this. An experience with this 2025, what we will call a live-action remake of that original, it is now quite complicated by the fact that some of the storytelling decisions here, I do actually appreciate because I was completely unaware of how little was in that original and how much they needed to add. Actually, almost every single song in this movie is made for this movie. And I was listening and I was
except
waiting
for Whistle While You Work.
Yeah, but the context of that is totally changed. Of course. And there's like One Song for You or whatever, like the love song, that's like half sung in the original and they reworked that. So a lot of effort that I was not familiar with, how much effort had to go into readapting this because from what I've seen of The Lion King and The Little Mermaid, those are kind of like shot for shot remakes, in the loosest sense of the word. Like, okay, here's a sequence. That's a memorable sequence. Let's remake this. Let's re-sing this song. And most scenes in Snow White are actually original scenes and original songs. And actually, like, in part, like, original characters as well. So there's just a lot more effort, I think, that went into making this, which, again, is to say that I don't think this is a particularly great movie. And I think it's not a particularly great movie because, for me, as someone who is not particularly a fan of fairy tale stories, who did not really grow up with Disney storytelling as, like, the main thing that was, like, inspiring me as a child, the tropes and storytelling concepts of Disney princess movies are really grating to me, and they're really boring to me. Of course, I am a 24-year-old guy
in the year 2025,
film studies student, so this is not particularly like deep criticism. But my biggest problem with this movie is that I feel like a lot of the moments of like plot and world building and stuff are just like so stock standard by the numbers. And again, it's based on like a almost over 200-year-old story by this point. But that is where I find this movie to be kind of sticky for me. Is I appreciate that compared to the original animated film, they added a bunch of stuff that I do think quite improves it, but it's still trapped in this like
The shell,
sticky
yeah.
sweet mire of like. Really, this is a movie basically about but nothing, and you can still feel it at times.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about Snow White 2025, shall we? Um, I don't actually, no. I'll
Oh,
circle back one more
let's
thing.
not
One
do
more
that.
thing. That I think what you're getting at is a good point. That when they're working off of the old things, the storytelling tends to improve maybe slightly.
Yeah.
I've not seen it, but people often point to Kenneth Branagh's 2015 Cinderella
Mm,
as like probably the best version of a Disney live action remake.
sure.
And it's because, again, they're working off of a text that is decades old and not something that was made in the Disney Renaissance that people have more
Yeah, yeah, good
fondness
point.
and a greater affinity
Yeah.
for, and like that it is
Mulan,
concerned with
Aladdin,
its.
Lion King, Little
Yes,
Mermaid. Yeah, these are all much newer things. And
exactly.
hey, Moana and Lilo and Stitch coming soon.
Yes, exactly. So Tucker, now let's talk about
Yes.
Snow White 2025. I did mention in my opening thoughts, but I actually thought the songs were decent. They're
Yeah,
obviously
they're
written
good.
by Pasek and Paul, who are the Greatest Showman and La La Land songwriters, the sort of guys you go to if you're making a modern
Mm.
musical of this sort, and they're decent. I don't think there's any one that I especially liked, or that
Yeah, yeah.
I'll be getting stuck in my head, perhaps whistling while I work. But they're decent. They're fine. I think they're not grating necessarily.
No, yeah, I actually think the songs were consistently good. And again, another part of my experience was not knowing if or which was new or not.
Hmm.
Um, because I don't really. I mean, there's very little of that original Snow White movie that I have seen or been related to culturally. I like,
Sure.
okay, Poison Apple,
Yep. Magic Mirror.
Kiss of Truth, not Kiss of Truth, Kiss of True Love.
Yeah, that's right.
Like the basic stuff, but the songs I was expecting to like for some of them to catch my ear and be like, oh, you know what,
Mm-hmm.
I've actually heard that, and I was completely surprised, like, no, this is, and then I was like,
Oh, they're new.
especially on like composition and particularly performance level, I thought the songs were quite good.
Uh huh.
Rachel Zegler, the best part of her performance is when she is singing.
Yeah.
Uh,
Honestly.
her vocal range is very, very impressive, and I think they did a good job, like, obviously matching it to the music and the background movement and stuff. And so when everything is swelling, I'm like, this is cinematic feels, like someone's voice like reaching the highest heights, and
Mm-hmm.
like, oh yeah, and that credit is definitely given to Rachel Zegler and her singing performance, which I think definitely elevates the especially musical sequences of
Yeah.
this movie quite a lot. But I do need to share the thing that is also my biggest criticism of this movie.
Okay.
Or my biggest criticism that is like, whatever.
Hedged. Yeah.
One of my biggest points about this movie
Okay.
is I actually was not particularly impressed by her performance. She
Well.
does come out unscathed compared to a lot of the other elements of this film, but she's too stagey here. She's too
Mm.
Broadway here. She looks like she is putting so much thought into every facial expression that she's given, and she's got this weird look where anytime she's like gearing up for a moment of emotion, she leaves her
know.
whole body into it.
I know
And
exactly what you're talking about, Tucker. I felt the exact same thing.
yeah, and
Um.
it makes
Yeah.
her feel. It makes you feel fake, and of course, this character isn't particularly deep. It's not like this is like amazing characterization or nuanced character moments that she needs to be
Mm-hmm.
playing to. And I understand the theatricality of something like this, and it being a musical. Maybe you want to lean in a little bit more to a stagey, more Broadway-like performance, but it didn't work for me, and it made me feel like I couldn't connect to that character because she felt like a performance rather than a person that was put into this scenario that had to deal with it. I'm like, I don't really buy the emotions you're going through because Rachel Zegler's putting too much. There's too much effort being put into these
Hmm.
moments.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I mean, like I said, she is good, and particularly when she is performing
Yeah.
those musical numbers, I think she is good.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I think she sort of can blend into the malaise of the rest of the film. But I say that, but she does have a certain young movie starlet energy to her that can draw you in at any given point. Um, But speaking of that malaise, like, you know, we can say all these things, we can point to the highs or the lows of it, but a lot of this movie operates just right in the middle, just right at a real
Yeah.
low hum where you're like, yeesh, is this thing about over yet? This is just going and going and
Yeah, yeah.
going. Like, Tucker, what you remember what I just said? One of my most boring theatrical viewing experiences. Oh, the Electric State, not theatrical, but the
Yeah.
Electric State. I said one of my most boring viewing experiences in recent memory. This is also up there. I
Sure.
was just distinctly bored for this
Yeah,
film. You know, if you again, not necessarily for us. If you're an 8-year-old, you might be a little bit more drawn into this thing. But I mean, truthfully, if we're looking at this as like a 4-quadrant blockbuster, like
Yeah.
what's the hook here? Where are the like really entertaining performances and stuff like that?
Yeah, definitely.
Outside of some moments for Rachel Zegler, I can't really point to one that we're supposed to find. Even like I gotta find him, Andrew Burnap as Jonathan. Whew, what a wet blanket this guy is, huh?
Yeah, he's actually interesting because I largely do agree. I think that he's actually the one that, in terms of performance, so I don't think he's on the level of Rachel Zegler. He's definitely second down for me. Of
Fair.
This guy,
This
guy feels like he's part of the world, and he feels actually like a person, which I don't think you can say about any other side character in this movie. I'm like, I believe this guy in his motivations, which I don't really do for any other character or side character or villain. And I think that the moments that he and Rachel Zegler shared together are the only moments of like on-screen interaction that feel any level of believable. He gets some moments out of Rachel Zegler's performance that I think feel a lot more genuine and human than when she's interacting with, let's be honest, mostly absolutely nothing because it's animated characters. But I don't think he's particularly fantastic. I don't think he's stand out, but he's also the one that I felt like he's the least stagey. He's actually stage performance, but he's the least stagey performance in the movie.
Well, yeah, I think it's because, you know, he is filling this role of a character that is like removed from the princess fairy tale stuff. He is supposed to be this jaded guy who's.
I like that "Saw the Princess Problem" song. I thought that was a fun sequence.
Yeah. But then I also think that he has a bit too much smirky, smarmy energy for me to be endeared to him, actually. And I also don't think he necessarily has the juice of like a movie star necessarily.
No,
like
definitely.
when he leans in for True Love's kiss and he just kind of lays one on her, I'm like, that's it. That's the bit. That's the big True Love's kiss moment. Like, if we're really trying to like give this thing some bravado, like get some guy who has some energy here. Let's get something rolling here. I don't know.
Yeah, and that is a problem that I definitely apply to him, because I agree, especially in some of those more climactic moments. I don't think he does very much, but I also think that's especially true for any other lower level supporting cast member in this movie. Gal Gadot is of course her own thing, as we'll talk about.
We'll talk about her.
But this movie, it feels like it has no characters. Like
it's crazy.
Everyone feels like an M tier background character in this movie. You get these guards and these huntsmen and these people that are like the townspeople or whatever.
Yeah, Jonathan's and his band of merry men and women.
Like, get rid of all of these people. They don't feel like they belong. They don't feel like they do anything. They're just like they're just like screen filler. I'm like, get them out of here. I don't really care.
Like, the band of merry men and women, the bandits who live out in the forest. They're like, okay, this is an interesting element added to this story. Okay, or like, you know, there's like a rebel faction out in the woods leading a rebellion against the queen.
They don't do dick all, dude.
They have, aside from Jonathan, who we've already talked about, they have like 3 lines combined.
Yeah, well, and they're all the fucking crossbow guy.
Yeah, it's like,
and Quigley, I don't like his performance either.
Yeah, it's like Quigley, and then there's a guy who's like grabs pretzels at one point, and is like, "Oh, thanks for having us," which is a different guy.
They feel totally useless.
They don't talk. Yeah. Like, what are these characters? What are these things? Well, who are they? What's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, the idea, I guess, is to be like a sense that there are others that are fighting back, which I understand on concept, but when they have no personality, when the performance is so flat, then when you have these moments of like, oh, we're gonna dance around with the dwarves, or like, you know, the evil queen is defeated, so like we can like cheer together, like it's you know the end of Star Wars. I'm like, I don't buy these moments, Or like when Flynn Rider or whatever almost dies.
He is very Flynn Rider too.
Yeah.
By the way, when he gets introduced and he's like stealing potatoes or whatever, I'm like, okay, so we're just doing Flynn Rider. Gotcha. All right.
Yeah. But then there's this moment where like they like come up and they're like, "Oh man, I'm so glad you didn't die." I'm like, I don't know who you are. Like I don't care that your friend almost died. To be honest.
I don't know you, buddy.
Yeah.
Oh,
there's like that weird like mini subplot where it's like the crossbow guy like maybe has kind of a crush on this other one. I'm like,
that?
Don't even. Why do you include this?
She doesn't talk. Like
She
we don't
doesn't
get to know
line
her. You know,
really weird.
Should we talk about Gal Gadot?
Let's do it.
All right. I mean, truly, what's going on? Truly, what's happening here? I can understand why you cast her as like an ideal of the evil queen, because when she's in the getup and not speaking or singing, you're like, okay, she's got the look to her a little bit.
The visual imagery and the costumes doing a lot of the talking there. Really, her costume's I think the best costume in the movie. Honestly, I love the like stained glass crown that she wears and like the 20-foot long trailing cape and like. Yeah. And she's like made of like just sparkles and stuff. I'm like, that's a crazy fucking costume. Yeah, but you're right. She looks the part, and then she has to go and open her mouth.
she is the antagonist of the film, and so she has songs and many extended scenes with Snow White and other characters. And you can
redact that. It is not many. She shares maybe 2 scenes with Snow White in this movie.
Sorry. But she is the antagonist, and then. I mean, you can find clips online of this stuff. You can find, bits of her in the trailer or whatever, and it is very It's an encapsulation of what her entire performance is.
Yeah,
here,
totally.
Which is, I can't even describe like why she is bad. She is just bad in this. Like it's truly baffling. Like she feels so stiff and unnatural, and her line readings are so bizarre. It's
the line readings particularly. I think that she physically, in terms of like motion, I'm like, okay, I can see sort of the theatrical performance going for.
Yeah.
In terms of theatricality, I actually appreciate leaning into that sort of camp a little bit more than I appreciated Rachel Zegler taking a little more theatricality to her performance.
I mean, she's supposed to be going for like the hammy evil queen.
Yeah, and so she's got like she's like moving her hands like that, and she's like throwing her arms up, and I'm like, okay, like visually I get that, but the problem is absolutely her line reading. It is her cadence that kills any moment. Yeah. She like delivers things in like she's like an alien trying to be a human. I'm like, what? How do they let this get by?
It's real. Max Lord, give me the stone energy.
Yeah. Well, no, and all of those moments from her previous performances are enough champagne to fill the Nile.
Yeah, exactly.
It is those moments distilled into an entire performance, and it is absolutely bizarre. Like she doesn't have I think that she can on occasion I'm really just Wonder Woman 1 deliver like a moment of like visual spectacle or like single line reading. I'm like, okay, I can understand why people might gravitate towards her, but there's none of that in this movie, and it is all of the worst moments of her rest of her like highlight, like I guess low lights of her career that people make fun of, instilled into an entire performance, and I thought it was absolutely impressive.
Her performance, every scene she has is like all low light. You're just line after line. You're like, what is she doing?
Yeah,
what's going on?
And then of course she transforms herself into an old lady, and that is not makeup. That is not makeup. That is a CGI old woman face plastered over her. That the eyes sometimes like kind of don't blink right, and like I feel like it's not moving right. And I'm like, don't buy this at all. Don't buy this at all.
Yeah. I don't know if I have a whole lot else. I will say that
there's some dwarves in this movie.
Oh fuck the dwarves. I mean, people were like, "You gross monsters" when they first got shown to us, and like. There is a bit of that to the movie. Yeah. I still think, like, especially when they're like smiling or being happy and looking around. There's like, oh Christ! All right, let's back up a little bit. But also like I don't know, they're kind of fine, I guess. Like they have a couple. The moment where Doc says like he tries to rescue Jonathan, and he's like, I thought he died. I was like, that's pretty funny actually. But otherwise, just kind of another mix in the malaise of nothing in this movie for me.
Yeah, it's interesting because they're the biggest part by far of that original movie, and they're really kind of what like all the iconography of this movie hammers on, and it's surprising that I mean, maybe just because like you introduce Jonathan and all of his merry band of misfits, and like you pump up Snow White's characterization, all that, which I actually do kind of want to get into a little bit.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And increase the role of the evil queen, but they feel like much less of a factor in this movie. Like by the halfway point of the movie, I'm like, well, they're kind of just standing around for the rest of this. Like they don't really serve too much of a purpose after Snow White needs a place to sleep.
Yeah, they feel like their role is largely kept the same, except for like, what do they
saving Jonathan? Doc saving Jonathan's like the only. And then
yeah, because like what do they do in the final act of the movie? Do they help at all with the
no? Well,
like
and that here's the problem is with this whole screenplay, and again, I think it's a lot better than the original, but it does not mean it's a good screenplay where it manages its characters properly. There's this big moment where all the hunters or the bandits, Jonathan, the dwarves, Snow White, they're all like, all right.
Hands in, everybody. Let's go
basically
defeat the evil queen.
And then they all like scurry off their separate ways. And then Snow White stands on a bridge and tells her, "No, we're not going to take it anymore. We're mad as hell." And then everyone's like, "Yeah,
yeah."
I'm like wasn't
and
there like a plan?
And then we just
hard
cut to the queen defeating herself, basically by destroying the magic mirror.
It's really weird. But the dwarves, they do feel kind of useless to the story on the whole. But I do think that for me, by far, the best location in this movie is their house.
That looking
set
location
is
for
awesome.
Sure. Yeah.
The sunlight coming through, the like sort of Hobbiton look on the outside, all these little knickknacks and trinkets and stuff. I'm like, that's a really cool set. It's an interesting location. I think they do the most with it when all of them are like bouncing around and I'll say doing Seven Stooges activities there. I think that the Whistle While You Work sequence, I think that's actually kind of fun.
It's pretty good.
The like physical comedy of them all bumping into one another.
Yeah.
And another element I think does give them some charm is adding minor but character arcs to particularly Grumpy and Dopey, giving Doc a little bit bigger of a role.
Yeah.
There's still a bunch of filler ones that don't really matter.
Yeah.
When you have 7 identical characters, of course that's how it goes.
They're not identical. One sneezes, one is happy, one is sleepy. Come on, they have very distinct personalities. Let's be real.
I did like the moments that Snow White shares with Grumpy and Dopey. With Dopey and Grumpy particularly, I thought those were kind of nice. Dopey's like Dopey's you know what, Tanner? Dopey's the character that gets out of this movie the most unscathed. I'm like, I kind of like that guy. Like he's a charming little character. I like his little character arc. But yeah, and also to this movie's credit, well, okay, let's talk about credit and discredit for the dwarves. I like that they differentiated the dwarves a little bit more. Yeah. And I think that there is like one ideal in my mind to like amalgam of them that's like the ideal CGI man dwarf. But then it's kind of like divided into all these things. Like, but okay, whatever. Sure. The designs are fine. But my problem with the dwarves and why I don't really like them at the end of the day too much is they don't move right. They don't have weight to them. They don't have physicality to them. And so they just like move through the environment like kind of odd. And I'm like, I don't buy it.
There is an uncanny valley to them, regardless of how
sometimes
some of them
their
are.
lips don't match the words perfectly. It's really weird.
I will say, this film has had some like writer script problems. I believe there's one credited writer on this film, but if you look at like the WGA stuff, there's like 7 story by. And then like Greta Gerwig was initially supposed to write this movie. And I think you can kind of feel that because like the whole thing with their power of being able to like touch the rocks and then find all the gems, and then the evil queen being obsessed with like gems and stuff is like, oh, this is how they're gonna change it. She's gonna try and like imprison the dwarves and like make them mine and steal all their jewels or whatever. But they don't do that at all. No. Which feels like the beginnings of a plot line, and maybe I was just reaching. Maybe I was just
you're right.
Looking for stuff. But like I was like, that feels like something that was really just cut off and like left over from a previous version of the script.
Yeah, the touching part. Yes, absolutely.
Weird.
Yeah, so the only other element of this movie is what the changes they make to Snow White as a character, who is and this actually is, I think, the strongest part of the movie.
Okay.
Is she is given this sort of mantra and inspiration from her parents of fairness,
Yeah,
truth,
be
hope.
good.
I don't know. There's
Be
a
a good
couple of them.
person. Hey, Snow
Yeah,
White, be a good person.
but she's got these attributes that she is supposed to embody. And what this movie then becomes is her rising from this ostensibly slave-like role that she's serving under the evil queen to fulfilling the role that she was meant to be in this monarchy of the princess to the fair king, whatever. It's very stock standard on base level, story, fairy tale storybook sort of thing.
Yep.
But I do think that in terms of theme, in terms of a leader should put themselves or put their people before them. The most important part of a kingdom is the way that we treat its people, being fair, being kind, being honest. That in terms of a theme for a family movie, I think is actually very strong.
That's a good point. That's a good thing to bring up.
None of that is in the original story because she doesn't have a motivation in the original story. And so rewriting that for this character that has a motivation, she wants to find her father because she hasn't seen her in a long time, and then realizes that even though her father is gone, she can carry on his legacy. I'm like, that's a motivation. That's a character arc. She comes to learn something about herself. She continually mentions like this, she survived a blizzard when she was younger, and is that girl still somewhere inside her? Can she find it in herself? I'm like, that is, I like that actually, and I think that those themes of like community and treating others well and stuff, I'm like, that's a really good message for
it is,
a kid's
honestly,
movie.
yeah. Like when she has her, we've already kind of railed against the as like a lackluster ending, but when she has her like big final confrontation with the evil queen, like on this bridge or whatever in front of the townspeople, like the things that she's saying are like good lessons to impart.
Doesn't mean it's a great scene, but
which is ultimately what like fairy tale storytelling is all about, is like imparting messages on like life lessons on children.
Tanner, I implore you to go back and watch the original movie. What's the message?
Don't take stuff from strangers. Being evil.
Sure. I guess that. Yeah, I guess the apple. She doesn't. Or whatever. That's fucking stupid.
Anyway. But yeah, I mean, honestly, the message which are sort of core to Snow White's character and everything like that remains strong, intact, good stuff for like kids to watch. So I say that this is a 4-quadrant blockbuster and what's entertaining about it and yada yada yada. But like, you take a kid to it, they're probably gonna have a good time. They'll probably come away with a decent enough message.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I think that is why I will agree with you with what you said at the beginning of this. This is probably one of the stronger live-action remakes that they've done. It doesn't mean that it's a particularly great movie. The screenplay or performances especially are very good, but it actually does add texture and theme to the original text. I think is a worthwhile adaptation to imbue this iconic character with something that actually can be a positive influence on the younger people that are watching this. And so I do have actually quite a bit more respect for this movie, even though I don't necessarily enjoy it like particularly super more than the other ones. I have a lot more respect for the texture they added to this movie, which is why I stipulate all the stuff with the original at the beginning. It's like there was more work put in here than just like then what we criticize about a lot of it is like, why did you even bother? It's like, well, there was a reason to bother here.
Yeah, I mean the why do we even bother thing? It's unfortunate that this is probably going to be one of their worst performing ones. Because it's not like cloying at like Gen X millennial nostalgia stuff and like
it's cloying at our great grandparents' nostalgia and they're dead.
It's not like looking to blockbusterize or make more realistic something that people remember from their childhood necessarily. It is more going for an adaptation of what is like a cultural touchstone more than anything else in 2025. It's like Snow White. People don't necessarily think of it as like a movie; they think of it as like a Disney thing. Like it is a foundational stone of the brand now, which I guess makes sense as to, I'm gonna use big air quotes here, why they had to remake it. But it's an interesting offshoot in this Disney live action experiment of like why they feel they have to do these things, what money or interest they feel can be mined out of it. Like, will they continue to do these more classic ones? Will they do Bambi? Will they do
Sleeping planned?
I think that one is planned. Will they do like Sleeping Beauty or whatever? Will they continue to do these, or will they focus on like doing things like Lilo and Stitch or what are some other ones? They're like Atlantis or some shit.
Hercules.
I don't know. Hercules, exactly.
Yeah.
I think the answer is obvious based on the reception, mostly the box office reception of both those camps of Disney live action remakes. Tucker, I'm gonna give this a 4.5 out of 10.
Yeah, I'll say the exact same. I mean, I think this is a below average movie in terms of its strength of performances and writing and side characters. I think that it is, for me, quite significantly improved over the others by the amount of effort that had to go into updating it for not just a modern audience, but like an audience that has seen fucking movies before.
Has seen animated movies before?
Yeah.
I got you.
That has some sense of storytelling importance to them. And so I find this to be, for me, by far the most interesting of any of these live action remakes.
Yeah.
Because there's like artistic texture to it in some conversational way. But yeah, it's still not very good at the end of the day. And I actually wasn't particularly sold by Rachel Zegler's performance. I think Gal Gadot is bad. I think all the side characters are bad. And I think the way that it just like follows the classic beats of a really generic fantasy land, I think are really, really bland. But there is sometimes a heart in there. And when Rachel Zegler is singing at the top of her lungs, I'm like, there's something here.
Yeah. When she is just being her like lovable self, singing about being fair and true and just, you're like, I can see this. I buy this a little bit.
You seem fair.
You seem fair,
Rachel.
Anyway, Tucker, we got Lilo and Stitch coming up, but we'll also review plenty of movies before that in the meanwhile.
To cleanse our palate.
To cleanse our palate, that's right. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. We will see you next time.